With that said, the person that's has emceed this for us and kind of herd the chickens the last few years is Judge David Blackburn, Bell County's judge. David, if you don't know, he had a weak moment like I did, and he worked in a place called Hale County, spelled H-A-L-E. But for me, it was H-E-double-L, by the way. But it was a great place to raise your kids. It was just tough weather, tough times, and I got there after he left, but we've been blessed by his leadership, both as city manager in Killeen, city manager in Temple, executive director of the EDC for the city of Temple, and then was elected to our county judge. Judge, the floor is yours. And here's this right here, too, and you can preview your slides right there.
Thank you. Good morning. Before I get started on the slide deck, and I trimmed it down this year, I'm sure everybody will be pleased about that. So there's less slides and less of me. We've got Dirk has put together an outstanding group of folks to come talk to you today, and I'm excited about that, so I want to do that. But I think I've done this every year the past few years, but I always like to know who's in the room. We've done a little bit of that already, and there is one person, Dirk, that I know that you wanted to mention and overlooked a little bit. You mentioned Mr. Larson and his service in the state legislature. I think we have another person in the room who is also in service to the state legislature from this community, Mr. Stan Schlueter, and I think I saw him in the back, somewhere back there. There he is right there. Thank you, Stan, for being here also. Stan has been very instrumental in lots of things happening around Central Texas, and you're going to see more of that in the not-too-distant future, I think, also. All right, so in the room, how many folks in here right now are water purveyors or associated with a water purveyor of some kind? Water Supply Corporation, city, anything. All right, keep your hands up for a second, if you would. All right, look around the room a little bit, and these are water purveyors. I count maybe a dozen or so, maybe a little more. You can put your hands down. All right, how many are governmental entities of some kind representing that? Not necessarily water purveyor, but governmental entity, okay? Look around the room, and again, maybe a dozen, maybe a little more than that, okay? How many of you would just classify yourself as private citizen, property owner? The majority of people in the room. That is a great thing. That is a great thing. And I think I have seen that every year grow in this room. I think this is the 23rd year that Dirk has put all this together, and to see more and more private property owners coming to this and getting engaged in our water issues is really what's going to help solve our water issues. The government entities that are here, the water purveyors, the cities, the river authorities, all of that crucial to providing planning for water development and providing for water across our region. But really, to make it all work, and especially to make new initiatives work, it takes the end user being motivated and engaged. And that's what the majority of this room is end users. So very appreciative of that. So thank you for being here. All right. What Dirk asked me to cover briefly is just sort of growth, development, population, that kind of thing. And I'm going to start kind of at a macro level. I'm going to go to the state level and then to the Central Texas level in terms of what we're seeing and what we've seen. You've seen this slide before, I think. I've showed it for several years, but this is the latest U.S. Census heat map showing the fastest growing areas in the United States. And as of 2023, in terms of year-over-year growth, percentage growth, the fastest growing area in the United States is the Texas Triangle. You've heard that phrase before also, but that triangular area from Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex to Bexar County, San Antonio, over to Harris County, and all the dark colors you see there, and then the lighter colors, is the fastest growing place in the United States. And that's been the case for some time, but it hasn't slowed down. And I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, I don't think. Governor Abbott has made several statements about our growth and our development. Best state for business growth over the past 19 years, has led the nation in technology-related business growth. And I'll come back to that here in just a second or make a couple of comments, but for the past decade, the tech industry, and in particular things like data centers and Bitcoin operations and things like that, are growing, are coming in big numbers. And those two types of industries, for example, in the tech area, as many of you know, not only have a high power demand, in other words, they require a lot of energy off of our grid, but they also have substantial water needs associated with those. And that represents, while the growth is good in one sense, the demand that it places on our energy and on our water is substantial. And that has been growing at the best pace or the highest pace of anywhere in the country also. We lead the nation in overall population growth, 21%. You probably heard the governor say this several times, but over 1,000 people or 1,100 people a day added coming to Texas or added to Texas population. Our current population is over 30 million people. Growth projections show the state growing at an average of 3.6 to 4% per year. And the estimates will have us at over 50 million by 2050. The over 65 component of that, which is near and dear to my heart now, is about 9.4 million. But the 15 to 64 component is the 34.7. So it's substantial numbers. That's the bottom line for that. Zoom in a little bit on Bell County. This is the best estimate I could find for 2024. Just under 400,000. Those of you who've come to this before have heard me say that I always think those numbers are low. I think the cities, and I know we have some city representatives in the room today, but when I was city manager, the way I would calculate population is I'd look at our solid waste numbers, the volumes that were going into the landfill, and there's some formulas that are very accurate. You can tell by how much waste is going into a landfill how many people you got. You can also tell by looking at your water connections and your utility collection. So I would use those two over the census numbers any day of the week. And those numbers were always higher for us than the census numbers. But that said, around 400,000, again, substantial number. This is the Killeen Temple MSA. And for those of you who have not seen something like this before, the MSA is a larger footprint than those two cities, and that's what that map depicts. 2023 population for that area that's outlined there is over 500,000 people. It's a substantial number. And our growth rate for the Killeen Temple MSA is a double-digit % growth rate in that entire MSA. And when you compare that to the national growth rate at 2.8%, that just shows you how dramatic and how much growth is occurring in this area and continues to occur. All right, that's some population numbers and some growth numbers. I want to talk a little bit about water. Some of this is just kind of duh for most of the people in the room. But water, the slide says, is likely to be the single most limiting resource for economic growth in Texas. I borrowed these slides from some other folks. I would have stricken likely. I think water is going to be the limiting factor for growth and development as we go forward. A close second to that could very well be energy, could very well be power. But we're going to talk about water today. But water is super, super, super key. These numbers, you probably can't read the sources at the bottom, but they come from American Water Works Association, American Society of Civil Engineers, and our state water plan, which, by the way, I sit on the Brazos G Water Board. Dirk sits on that board. I think I saw Gail peek here earlier. Gail is here. You have 3 representatives on the Regional Water Planning Board from this area. And that's significant also because that regional water planning board is one of several boards across the state that provide input into this state water plan. And so many of these numbers that you're going to see come from that state water plan, but from some other sources too. Texas' unmet water needs during a severe drought are projected to exceed 4.7 million acre feet by 2030. That's 27% of the total water usage. Now let that sink in for just a second. In a severe drought, which we seem to be having those about every other year now, it seems like. But as we have these severe droughts, it represents 27% of our total water usage. That's a big number. It's a huge number. And if droughts get worse and longer, it gets even more dire. The American Society of Civil Engineers assigns a C- to our water infrastructure and a D to the wastewater infrastructure. Again, I don't have to tell the water purveyors in the room that at all. When you listen to them and talk to them about what their infrastructure looks like and how they're struggling to maintain it, they probably are happy in one sense that they have a passing grade or a semi-passing grade because it's also in dire condition. Waterworks Association says 70% of our water infrastructure has passed its useful life. 70%. Again, that's a big number. That's a big percentage. And that's just, in one sense, looking at today and then looking backwards. It doesn't look forward. That's just looking backwards. That's a huge challenge for us. Tens of billions are required just to get our current infrastructure to where it needs to be. Again, big, big numbers. Numbers in many senses that you can't put your mind around. And when we can't put our minds around it collectively, what do? We tend to ignore it because we can't do it. We can't understand it. It's just too big. I think for a very, very long time, that's how we viewed water and investing in water planning and water development is the numbers are just too big. We just can't get there. We just can't get there. This slide from the Water Development Board. And first thing I want you to do is look at the graph and look at the red color, the red portion of those bars and follow that red across the line. And then look at the green, which is the bottom part of it. I guess it's green on your screen. Hope it is. Green, and look at the bottom part of that. What do you see the red portion of those bars doing over the decades? Increasing, getting bigger. And what's the red portion? It's municipal use. It's the water you and I, for most in here, it's the water you and I depend on in cities if you live in a city. But it's municipal use. It's municipal use. That shows it to be growing every decade. Should that be a surprise? No. We've got more people coming, 1,100 a day. So more people, more water needed. And that part of the graph represents that. If you look at the green part of it on the bottom part, what does that represent? It says irrigation. That's another way to look at that is that's ag. That's agriculture. And what do those green bars show? Declines. So it's showing for ag use across the state, ag is going to use less and less and less and less and less water. Whereas you and I, as consumers of water, are going to use more and more and more. Does anybody think that might be a challenge? It could be. It could be. Our current water usage in the state, go to the narrative on the left, 17.7 million acre feet, or 5.7 trillion gallons. Surface water, groundwater, reuse water, all are projected to decrease by approximately 18% from 2020 to 2070. Now think about that for a second. That's our water source. That's our water sources. And they're projected not to increase, but to decrease over the next several decades. At the end of 2023, we were experiencing severe drought, and about 79% of the state was under some form of drought. And what I mentioned earlier, it just seems like every year, every other year, we're into drought. It seems to be a more common occurrence. So you put the weather conditions on top of the population, on top of the growth, on top of ag usage, and you've created a scenario that really demands that we do something about that. Because if we don't, there's going to be a real problem. And it appears to be coming. According to the state water plan, Texas population is anticipated to increase 73% over that bar graph time period, from 30 million to about 50 million. And approximately half of that growth is going to be on the I-35 corridor between Austin and Dallas, which is where you sit today. Half of that growth is going to be in this corridor. The state water plan anticipates increased water demand to grow 9% over that time frame. At the same time, population grows 73%. Now think about that for a second. Demand for water will go up 9%. Population goes up 73%. That sounds like government math, doesn't it? How can that be? How can that be? Conservation strategies. These are in the water plan. Conservation strategies represent about 30% of the water per year, about 2.2 million acre feet, of all the recommended water strategies that we have. And if you've ever sat down and looked through the state water plan, and if you haven't done that, I would encourage you to do it. It's online. It's a long read, but there's tons of data, tons of information, and tons of policy that the state sets when it adopts that state water plan that are embedded in that water plan. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. And it lists a whole bunch of water management strategies. In other words, things that we're going to do to meet our water demand, a water management strategy. How are we going to get there? 30% conservation. In other words, well, this is the next slide, so let me pause there for a second. So here's some usage and challenges still. With our existing surface water perhaps overallocated and our projected water supply forecasted to be less, where's this new water going to come from? If we truly are going to have more demand than we have today, can we conserve our way out of this? Can more people use less water? Ag irrigation demand is projected to decrease. That's what those bar graphs showed you a minute ago, due to more efficient irrigation systems. And this is a quote from the current state water plan. To reduce groundwater availability and the transfer of surface water rights from ag to municipal users. So some of the state water plan assumes right now that the current water rights allocations for ag, some of those are going to be transferred or moved to municipal. I've already mentioned the conservation strategies. So in other words, all of the numbers and the narrative there, what the state water plan assumes is that as we go forward decade by decade by decade, more people are going to use less water. I don't think that's a really good assumption. And I'm on the board that helps put the plan together. But I don't know that I don't think we can conserve our way out of or to more water. Now, is conservation a strategy? Absolutely it is. Is conservation something we should do, preserve, and be just uber efficient with our water? Absolutely. But it's not, in my opinion, the silver bullet that will solve all of our water demand issues in the coming decades. It's just not going to do that, which means we got to do something else. We have to do something else. We have to do some things else, not one thing, but some things else. So what? Well, discussions have been occurring, and Dirk, you're going to wave at me, right? Give me a 5-minute, or somebody will. Scott's going to do it. 3 minutes. Okay. Discussions have been occurring for years, some would say decades, I would be one of those, about the need to address this issue. More people, not enough water. Recently, those discussions in this region have focused on a pathway that would create a regional water authority. There are about 30 of those in the state already, 30 plus. They're regional in nature, by footprint, by governance model. The survey, we have actually begun some discussions. We've had 2 meetings with area water purveyors to see who might be interested in creating a regional water authority. Our efforts have identified water purveyors and by their CCNs, and CCNs that serviced all or a portion of Bell County is where we started. In other words, we just started with Bell County and said, okay, do you have a CCN? Does it serve what area? Give us that. This is a map. That's the map of the CCN coverage areas with Bell County in the center, but as you can see, those CCNs bleed out into all of our neighboring counties. 31 in particular, my estimates are that area that you're looking at there serves about 600,000 people plus, and I'm probably low on that. It's probably a higher number than that. What we asked all those purveyors to do was send us a letter or a resolution or something to say, hey, we're interested in creating a regional water authority. We'd like to be a part of that. We'd like to talk about that. We've got that list that you see on the right there have all indicated they are supportive of the initiative. I'd highlight 2 things on that list without going through the whole list. The first thing I would highlight is at the top of the list, which is Fort Cavazos. The support we've received so far, and I think Brian was here, isn't he? Brian, I think we saw Brian Dosip. Brian's here with the garrison. We've got a letter from the CG, the commanding general, 3 Corps at Fort Cavazos, indicating very strong support for a collaborative, cooperative effort to get a regional water authority formed because it is essential to Fort Cavazos. We could probably stop right there. I think most people in the room would say, if Fort Cavazos says this is something that's needed for resiliency's sake, for sustainability's sake, for Fort Cavazos, then we're going to line up and support that. Well, again, there's a whole list of folks there that have indicated that. And then the other 2 that I want to mention are at the bottom of the list. These are 2 private entities. They're not governmental entities, they're private entities. Solana Ranch Mud, I say it's private, they're political subdivisions have been created, but I mean, Solana Ranch, many of you know, is a very large development that is proposed for the southern part of Bell County. 14,000 plus units. I don't know if we have somebody here from Solana Ranch. Mike, welcome. And Todd Jensen are both here, so welcome. They've indicated an interest, and I think that's significant also, is that this probably, going forward, if we're able to do what we're hoping we can do in this next legislative session, it's going to take a very large swath of support, public and private, to make it happen. And so, again, in my mind, a very impressive list, and a list that is growing. I got two emails yesterday from folks that are not on this list that said, hey, I just heard about this, and I want to be supportive of this. We're going to talk more about this. I think that was my next to the last slide. Representatives from all those interested parties that you saw on that list have met twice. Most recently, I think it was last week, we filled the room with representatives from those entities at the COG, which is where we met. There was not an empty seat in their large boardroom. We talked about the process to form a regional water authority. We talked about some general provisions that has to be addressed in the legislation. And so we're forming now a working group from that large group to work on actually reviewing and drafting the legislation that we're going to hand over to our state senator and our state representatives, who have indicated support for this and are willing to carry the bill and see if they can get it through the legislature. We have the morning devoted to this, to talk about this. Mr. Graham Moore, Executive Director for Alliance Water, is here to talk about their experience with their water authority just to the south. Very pleased that he's here. I think you're going to find his presentation extremely interesting and illuminating in terms of what they have done and how they've done it. We have been leaning on Mr. Moore quite a bit to help us as we walk through this process in our early stages, and he's been very gracious with his time and his expertise to help us, and I appreciate him being here today. Again, we've got an outstanding panel that will follow that after Mr. Moore finishes. Senator Flores, Representative Buckley will be here. Mr. Moore will stay on stage, and we'll just kind of have a little bit of a roundtable discussion, and questions will be entertained from the audience. So if you've got questions as you go through the morning, write those down, and we'll have some microphones and we'll go around and get to you. I think that was my last slide, so I'm going to let Whitney come over